That's Nick.
And that's Joseph. And today we're here to talk about Grafted, the directorial debut of Sasha Rainbow, which Shudder is releasing on its streaming service January 24th, 2025.
Directorial debut.
It is.
What is Grafted about? A bright but socially awkward exchange student takes her craving for popularity to horrifying heights. That doesn't feel accurate.
No, not
Here
really.
we are. What's your pull quote?
A commonplace but effective narrative impetus blending beauty standards, identity issues, and body horror, Grafted quickly reveals itself to be a rather rushed, inconsequential exploration of themes done better countless times before.
Ooh, mine. Its gruesome premise quickly loses steam as the script rapidly loses focus. In short, gruesome seems to have stretched itself too thin.
Yeah, it feels like it could have been part of like a Tales from the Crypt episode or something like that.
So I feel like there are three things happening. It's like body horror mixed with a revenge thriller, mixed with something that's like commentary on beauty standards. And it doesn't really go full tilt in any direction.
No, and I think inconsequential, everything feels very strung together. There's no buildup. There seems to be an inability to develop tension because things almost just seem happenstance.
So the story revolves around a young lady named Wei, and Wei is from China. And we meet her as a young girl. We see that her dad is a scientist.
A mad one.
A mad scientist. He has a skin condition, which my first problem with the story is that the skin condition is not that bad. He looks like he has a port wine stain on his cheek, but is a handsome man. And he's working on something to try to get rid of it, which looks like him grafting skin onto that location. And when he does, it goes awry because that graft expands and basically suffocates him. And what I think is, the opening is effective because we see the father suffocating and trying to like open his holes with a scalpel.
And then the daughter, the little girl, trying to perform a trach.
Right. So that was effective. Then we flash forward to Wei being like, I guess she just graduated high school, still in China, and we see that she's been accepted to a college in New Zealand. So we see her go to New Zealand and she's going to live with her aunt.
Aunty Ling.
And the aunt, used to be rich.
She was wealthy because of her husband who left her for another woman while they were mid-construction on this mansion that they
Which is now very Grey Gardens. Coincidentally, the aunt is working on a beauty product of some sort.
Which also seems very tangential in a way that it's not utilized here, where I feel like that should have been scrubbed in a rewrite.
Beyond tangential. It's kind of confusing. Like, why even bring it up? But anyway, the aunt is in this big dilapidated mansion with her daughter,
Angela.
Mm-hmm.
By the way, Wei as an adult, a young woman, is played by Joyena Sun, and Jess plays Angela.
And Angela has fully assimilated to a New Zealand way of life. Like, she doesn't really even appreciate her Chinese culture.
Rejects it wholeheartedly, yeah.
And also goes to the same, I think it's called the College of the West. That's where she's going. She also happens to be in the same science class we see Wei in. And the cousin, Angela, has two friends that kind of mimic the mean girls. And the main girl, Eve, is kind of like a Regina George type character.
Played by Eden Hart.
And they're not nice.
They're also not the worst.
They're not the worst, especially the one.
They're pretty milky.
Who actually befriends Wei.
Jasmine, played by Sepi.
But the professor of this class immediately announces, like in the first day of class, I need a lab assistant. So if you're interested, sign up. Wei signs up because she wants to do research. She has her father's research notebook, which is all in Chinese.
Filled with bloody diagrams.
And filled with these bloody diagrams. And the professor says, yeah, you can work here, and if you're good, I'll let you do your own shit. So she starts immediately experimenting.
It's worth noting that Paul, that's his name,
professor,
played by Jared Turner, he is also undergoing, funding might be taken away from whatever.
That's an important plot point. Yeah, that he needs to, that whatever research he sort of presented got rejected. So we see that he's told that if he doesn't come up with a new thing to research, he might lose funding.
So he needs to find something compelling fast, which I think is we're supposed to rationalize his finding way interesting because of what she might have in this notebook, which feels really flimsy.
Yeah. But then everything happens very fast because Wei is successfully able to graft something onto her skin and then ends up killing her cousin accidentally. Like they get into an argument and Wei stabs the cousin in the eye with a chopstick and then has the bright idea immediately to switch faces, which she does successfully. So now Wei is Angela.
And by switching faces, she carves her cousin's face off, places it on her own, and uses her little rinky-dink serum, and it fuses perfectly.
We need to talk about that. So then we get Wei as Angela bebopping around. No one seems to be worried about Wei. Then she ends up killing the nice mean girl,
Jasmine.
Then she ends up killing the mean girl, Eve. And then she uses Eve, like this new body, to try to get her research back from the professor who had stolen the notebook. She ends up luring the professor to the mansion, ends up performing like the treatment on him, which causes him to kind of whatever happened to her dad, except she puts a straw in his mouth so he can breathe. So we don't know if he's dead. And then the final scene is that
she's fleeing from the police.
She's fleeing from the police, and then we also don't fully understand if the experiment works long term because we see that it starts to crack and she has to peel her face off. So at the very end, she's like homeless on the streets.
There's another tangential character, a very disfigured, unhoused person that she's kind of randomly befriended. And as she's fleeing from the police, she asks him for to hide under his crispy wing, and she accidentally crushes the serum, and they fuse together. And it's suggested at the final shot is kind of this new evolved fusion of the two, but it seems like that part is not temporary. So maybe it's a dosage issue. I don't know.
The end. Yeah, I feel bad because there's a lot about it that didn't work for me. First off, the effects of the body horror and her switching faces. I mean, you can think of countless movies from like the 80s and 90s.
Oh, going back even further.
That use cheap practical effects that look better. And for some reason in this film, everything is CGI. Even like the little flaps of skin that they hold to put on their face looks...
We could have gotten to some eyes without a face.
Didn't we just watch The Cable Guy? Doesn't Jim Carrey's character do that where he puts some meat on
Yes,
it? Even that looked better than this movie. And then you already mentioned it, but her switching faces, we see her cut her face off, but then it just looks like she had the vampire facial. Like we don't see any of the tendons or muscle underneath.
Yes, and we kept questioning like what exactly are we seeing when the new face, falls off, or she has to peel it off in some moments. But we needed this could have been really fun and kitschy if, what if we'd had a reference to that Nick Cage moment about take his face off?
Well, the bone structures, like it seems to fuse in a way that everything morphs to. It just feels. Movies like this, the science doesn't have to make sense.
It doesn't have to, and that's very much a trope of a B movie, a B genre film. And this really harkens back to femme-centered B genre sci-fi films of the 40s and 50s. I was thinking of Anthony Mann's Strange Impersonation. There's a lot of Frankenstein vibes in here, like Lucky Mickey's May. I'm jumping ahead in time. But I also kept thinking of The Leech Woman with Colleen Gray.
Oh, sure.
Where she's, drinking people's pineal juice, and it makes her younger, but the effect does eventually fade, and she has to victimize more people to keep whatever it is going on. Or Wasp Woman with Susan Cabot. There are countless examples.
So the visuals of the experiments and the face swapping didn't really work for me. So Wei is a beautiful young lady. She just has this, again, it just looks like a port wine stain on her cheek, which she's very sensitive about, which is so funny to me because she has this crazy buck tooth, and I kept thinking she should be more worried about her smile than this little thing on her cheek.
I agree. But it's that tooth that is the visual, that denotes visually her changing.
So as she switches to the other three young ladies who she killed and took their faces, the thing that's supposed to represent Wei is the smile, which doesn't always match, except because it's the woman, because all these young ladies have different smiles, but then they just put this one crazy tooth hanging out, which of course was making me think of either Fifi O'Hara or from Drag Race,
Yes.
or Michaela Couture from Canada's Drag Race.
Yeah, I remember them. Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I
I thought you were going to say Walter Matthau from Dennis the Menace with the chiclets.
That's a good one too.
But it's so obvious that none of the friends who are, hypersensitive to their looks aren't realizing.
That's a really good point, that her vapid ass friends, like Angela's friends, don't notice when she shows up with this crazy tooth. I wish that whatever Wei's character was dealing with that made her so self-conscious that she wanted to do these experiments, and whatever her dad had, that it was so extreme that it would warrant like this passion to figure it out.
Well, everybody has such a reaction to it, including when Aunty Ling shows up and like pokes beneath the scarf and kind of recoils. And it's like, there's nowhere, anywhere in this universe in New Zealand that's like, girl, you're fine. And also they make it seem that she sticks out considerably because of her heritage, but there are a lot of Chinese people in Australasia.
I'm just going to go through my notes. When we meet Angela's two friends and them together, I thought these girls seem too old to be acting like this.
Especially Angela.
Because I know, again, Angela's a beautiful woman, but I like in the way she's presented in this film, she seemed like a woman in her 30s dressed like a schoolgirl. I also don't understand the school, because sometimes we're walking through the halls and it looks like they're like in the 10th grade. Even Angela's boyfriend, who looks like Corbin Blue, they seem like they're in the 10th grade.
Well, the way that their behaviors are being dictated. I think it's notable that there are 4 scribes on this script for something that is the kernel, the originating kernel of this idea is very familiar, and yet with 4 writers, we never moved beyond anything skin deep, pun intended.
Well, it does feel like 4 different stories meshed into one.
But I think something that does, like, if we're just talking about a mark on a woman's face, something more contemporary, it reminded me of that does it much better, and doing the identity theft thing is that film Influencer, with that model / actress that has actually...
Where she's in Thailand, I believe, which is quite good.
It's her real birthmark that's on her face, and I think that, in even a meta sense, is doing something more interesting.
Or, of course, even with the visual at the end, I thought The Substance.
Yes, probably unfortunate that this is actually being released after The Substance, and you kind of can't get away from that comparison with The Mutant at the end. But then it doesn't make sense, like...
Well, I also don't understand what the point is. Like, what's the commentary on... It doesn't really take any opportunity, from my perspective, to have any opinion about...
Is that a karmic bullet that happens to Wei? Like...
Right. Yeah. Because I was not satisfied with the ending. I would have preferred they pare it down and just have this young lady who is more deformed than what we see, wanting to figure out how to change herself, and she's bullied, and she uses these bullies to be the guinea pigs for her experiments, and then it all culminates in this professor who steals her research, and she gets the final comeuppance, and then in the end she's the beautiful woman she really wanted to be. Yeah, but does that really equal happiness?
Exactly.
That could have been the message.
But with, usually with these kind of, at this B grade level, wanting some kind of catharsis, she goes full tilt repulsion real quick.
Very quickly.
And then I think that we're also, I think it's highly symbolic that she stabs her xenophobic cousin with a chopstick through the eyeball. And I think that moment, it's like nothing really breathes. I think that needed to really register that that is kind of ironic.
There's another kind of obvious symbol that is used, which is in the dad's research experiments. A big part of the component of this experiment is the corpse flower.
Mm-hmm. Which also reminded me of Dennis the Menace and that
40-year-old blooming lily or whatever. But so of course this thing that's so grotesque is the source of what could make them beautiful. And then we get the professor going to this arboretum or something to find a sample.
Mm-hmm. And that is how he cracks the code of the dead father's notebook. And I think that all feels so tangible. It's not streamlined well enough. It's not folded into this like the nice confection that it should. I think that there's so many things. Why are the police looking for Angela when the police show up? Who has reported Angela missing?
That part. Also, the aunt.
Auntie Ling's driving around.
Auntie Ling is just... Well, and then we get a scene where Auntie Ling is in a bar looking for some company. What, like, I mean, I don't know what she's doing there, and then she's gone for a while.
But if Auntie Ling is the one that reported her own daughter missing, she never comes back to the house where Wei is continually doing weird things. She has corpses there. And it takes her at least days to dump these corpses in a nearby pool, which was giving me the original House on Sorority Row where they're dumping bodies in that pool. But
so body horror doesn't work for me. There's only one scene that I thought was really gross. I mean, the opening's effective, but the most gross out scene is we see that, because initially we don't know where Wei is getting these skin samples from. And then we find out that she's getting them from her inner thigh, and she's using a grater. That was hard to watch. That was effective.
She's the Marie Curie school of self-experimentation at all costs.
But I will say what did work for me, and what I think this could have worked better as, is more of like social commentary, dark comedy, because when Wei switches to her cousin and then not her little friend, the second death, but the third death, Eve, when she's practicing to be like them.
I think that, again, I think there are some really fun moments there, and you almost want them to get there quicker as well, especially when she's the white girl. And I think that there could be an interesting culture clash there, because even Eve, before Eden Hart is also having to pretend like Wei is inhabiting her body, was giving me Margot Robbie mixed with one of the Wayans' white chicks. And I think that her trying to fake that, and also if it wasn't so seamless, like there was something obviously wrong with her.
Yes.
And also Wei is much shorter. She wouldn't also inherit the stature of this taller white girl. And how people would not be able to comprehend that kind of change in someone's physicality.
There's a scene when Wei first turns into Angela, and then she goes with her little Corbin blue boyfriend to like overlook point to neck on the edge of a cliff. And while they're making out, her face falls off. And he freaks out, gets up, and like walks off the hill.
They're on a precipice, and then he's on, when we see a visual of him on an overturned car.
I thought that was really weird, because the car that's overturned is not the car he drove, so that's fair.
His body wouldn't have done that.
It was such a weird moment.
Yeah, it's very strange. But again, there are points with Jess Hong and Eden Hart where they're doing that pretending, which is a lot of fun. Especially there's a Australian, well, she'd be a Kiwi neighbor that works in service of Auntie Ling that's also on the property, and there's some interaction she has with Eden when Wei is in her body, or Eve is the character name, and she's screaming and she seems crazy. Those moments are fun. Those seem unhinged. And I feel like if that had really leaned into that, you could have, speaking of 80s films that use practical effects, it could have been like a Larry Cohen or a Frank Henenlotter, like a Frankenhooker.
That's what I was thinking immediately, that it could have had that vibe.
Or like Angela Bettis in May, where she's hand selecting people like, I want that body part, or I want to reconfigure myself based on these people that I see.
Yeah.
It feels really limited based on the presentation. And again, with these kind of films, the suspension of disbelief is actually fine. I don't need to know the mechanism of what's happening doesn't need to make sense, but make it make sense.
I know there are a lot of positive reviews, and I can see why people like aspects of the film, and I do think there's a style to it that I quite enjoy, and I would be interested in watching this person's next film.
Yes.
But as it is, I was not satisfied. I'm sorry.
No, and especially if you're familiar with the legacy of cinema and all the things that have been out there for years and years and years, this is too familiar, I think, to deserve overt praise.
What would you give Grafted?
I'm going to give it a 2 because ultimately it was more frustrating than an enjoyable genre experience.
I agree, unfortunately. I would give it 2 out of 5. Join us on Patreon and listen to our podcast. Bye.